So I started out, I grew up in view of the Cascade volcanoes, and it wasn't until I was a pretty poor family, so it wasn't, even though we were right near the ocean, I never saw the ocean until I was, past high school, I think. So I never really thought about, I was always in love with the volcanoes, Mount Rainier and the Cascades, and I was alive when St. Helens went off, which was a wonderful day, at least for me. But and then in 1980, to put myself through school as an undergrad, I started working for a fellow named John Delaney, and my first summer he said, "Do you want to go to sea?" And I thought, all my relatives thought it was on a luxury cruise liner. But I fell in love with not only the exploration part, but the people and just everything about being at sea and the waves and the weather and everything that happened there. So I think most people may not know, but over 70% of the volcanism on the planet occurs underwater, but not many people get to see it because it's a mile or two down. And a lot of it occurs along the longest mountain chain on the Earth, on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, or the Mid-Ocean Ridge spreading centers. And so the crustal formation, 70% of the Earth is oceans, and that it's a very fundamental part of our planet, and yet it's very, up until recently, relatively inaccessible. So there's many, many things we still don't know about volcanoes, how they interact with life, their lifespan, many things about it. We know that from satellite new bathymetry data, there's hundreds of thousands of volcanoes, and I'll show you some satellite imagery from that. But with that, no mid-ocean ridge eruption has ever been witnessed live. We've seen a few of them, like in the Marianas, by robotic vehicles. But still, when you consider that these have been going on as soon as there were oceans and volcanoes on the planet, billions of years this has been going on, but we're not there, right, to see them. Certainly the hydrothermal vents there's starting to be active mining of some of these systems, and so these hot springs on the seafloor are important sources for trace metals and things like gold and mercury in some places. And the volcanoes, I'll show you a couple cartoons, but these volcanoes are, when they start cooling and seawater migrates down into them, they create these amazing hot springs on the seafloor, and there's hundreds of these fields that have now been discovered, and they host some of the most novel organisms on the planet that live under conditions that would kill almost anything that we know. But they can also be hazardous, particularly when they're shallow. So if you, probably a lot of you have seen something like this, but if you strip off the water and you look at this red seam that looks like a seam on the baseball that wraps around our planet, that's where the mid-ocean ridges are forming, and the plates are spreading apart. Common figure is about the rate at your fingernails grow, and it's where the youngest, hottest rocks on the planet are forming. And there's probably eruptions going on every single day, but until recently we didn't have the acoustic devices, and we certainly don't get out there when the eruptions are going on. And so for until the last decade or two, we really haven't known when the eruptions were occurring. And so if you look at someplace like Iceland, where the Mid-Atlantic Ridge splits, there's been a very long-term impulse of melt coming up, and so the volcano, somewhat similar to Hawaii, has had a long time to form and reach the ocean surface. And what's great is you can take students there, and this is where you can see a picture of the Rift Valley here that separates the two plate systems. And it's a wonderful place to go, and there's also some hot springs associated with these things, so it's not a bad place to hang out for a while. And you can walk around these exposed sections and learn quite a bit about certain parts of crustal formation and the hot springs. But the part that I spend a lot of my time studying is so this is a cartoon of a mid-ocean ridge spreading center, and there's upwelling convection currents deep within the mantle that occur beneath these spreading centers, and the plates spread apart right here. And this thin crust is it's just a really, really thin skin on the planet, basically. And this is the place right here where a lot of the processes that we've been talking about go on. And I'll do a zoom in of that little box there. And so, again, this is where the axial valley, where the crust is spreading apart. And at some depths, maybe anywhere from 800 meters to a few kilometers to 4 kilometers, depending on where you are in the world's oceans, there's a holding tank, and we call it a magma chamber. So imagine this room, and you fill it up with 1,200 degrees C melt. If you keep pumping melt into that magma chamber, and the crust is under extension, eventually what happens is, imagine the ceiling, you fill the whole thing up, the room's under extension, and eventually the ceiling's going to break. And when that happens, there's a lot of gases that come off the melt, but there's a pipe that often, not always, reaches the surface, and then you get an ensuing seafloor eruption. So if you look at underwater volcanoes, this was from satellite data. It's an older image right now. There's a more recent one. But what you see is there's hundreds of thousands of volcanoes on the seafloor. And this is for scale. This is about 3 kilometers in diameter. And then we get up to something like Hawaii, which is 100 kilometers. And so all these little pyramid shapes here are underwater, what were underwater volcanoes. Not all of them are active, a lot of them are inactive. But one of the take-home points is, one, there's a lot of them. And two is that, probably in detail, we might have, I think, only looked at a handful of these in the detail that we really need to understand the processes that are going on. And some of these, even though they're far away from spreading centers, you still have very low temperature hot spring deposits on them that have animals associated them, and microbes associated with them. And so the point is that there's a huge part of our planet that's really fundamental to how our planet works, and we just don't get there very often and haven't been to very many places to understand the processes in detail. So I know there's going to be follow-on talk about the technology, but I thought I'd show you a little bit of how we access the seafloor, because it has changed over time. Places like Woods Hole and the University of Washington, we have these global class research ships that are about 84 meters long, and they really are the main workhorses now. And for University of Washington, every summer we take students out to sea. Sometimes the best laid plans, we got about an hour away from the dock, and the ship broke, and so the students got to spend their cruise in dry dock, which they got free food and free room and board, so they were kind of happy. But it's a view of the ship you don't get to see very often. I mentioned when I first went to see my relatives, and I think they probably still think it's like a luxury cruise liner. But these are really working class boats, and I'll show you a video in a second. So everything from toothbrushes to computers to robotic vehicles is what we have to bring with us. And typically a cruise might be anywhere from a few weeks to 6 weeks or so at sea. This is we call it the Steel Beach, the tanning salon. You can see the first class cabin because they have a little portal there, the health club, and then the main activity is sport is playing ping pong, which on a rolling ship is sort of entertaining. A lot of our cruises, most of them are funded by the National Science Foundation. Typically it could take 2 to 4 years or so once you put in a proposal to get it funded to go out to sea, and it's expensive. And so we use the ships very efficiently, usually 24 hours a day. Where I work off the Oregon-Washington margin, probably have the same deals here, right? The weather's a big deal, so when it's blowing 50 or 60 miles per hour, you don't get a lot of work done. And safety is a big deal, so everybody puts on Gumby suits, and it's a good, I used to say Kodak moment, but that doesn't mean too much to a lot of people anymore. But a lot of, safety is always a huge consideration, and so we pay a lot of attention to that. This is going to scream. Here, just a sec. I'll go back to a sec here. There, hopefully it'll stay. So one of the main tools, and I think Adam will talk a lot about this, is there's a 3-person submersible diving vehicle called Alvin. There's a pilot and usually two scientists. Typically we get in the sphere about 7:30 in the morning and go down, and where I work it's about 2,200 meters. Normally it takes about an hour and a half to get down to the bottom. This is an older vehicle. There's a brand new one which I think Adam will talk about. But for years and years it was a real workhorse, and it's still a workhorse to get to the seafloor and explore and look at underwater volcanoes and the life that they host. It's a phenomenal vehicle, but one of the trade-offs is that when you're in the sub with two people, there's not that great a communication to the surface, and so you know, I might see an animal. It might be a newly discovered animal. I don't know because I'm not a biologist, and so and it also usually is up about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and so typically the ship will do other things at night. But more and more, what we're starting to use, especially the cabled observatory, is robotic vehicles. And robotic vehicles, they use fiber optic technology. There's a couple of them around. We use both of these for the cabled observatory, one from Canada called Ropos, and one from Woods Hole called Jason. And it has a fiber optic cable that connects from the ship to the vehicle. And these vehicles have a lot of the same functionalities as a human-occupied vehicle. So they have arms that typically have force feedback. So that means that, and they also have a lot of cameras. So this is about a $180,000 camera, high-definition camera. They have multiple cameras, multiple look angles, a lot of sonar systems on them, a lot of different sensors that you can put on these vehicles depending on what you want to do. But the nice thing about them is because they're on a fiber optic cable that provides power and communication connected to the ship, that when you're down working at, say, 2,200 meters or even 6,000 meters or deeper, everything that the vehicle sees is streamed live to the ship in real time. And so there can be, depending on the control rooms, there can be 20 people in the control room, scientists, different disciplines, biologists, chemists, geophysicists, working and interacting during the dive. And it's also a great learning tool for students. So we routinely involve our students in the control room, and as they evolve over time, we actually let them direct dives. So it's a very interactive vehicle, and one of the important things for us, because we need to do 24-hour ops, is that the vehicles can stay down. There's no constraint. They can stay down because they're getting all their power. They're not battery driven like the submersibles, and so they can stay down for several days at a time until the mission is complete, or sometimes still things break. It's a harsh environment and things happen, and then it comes back on up onto the vehicle. The other thing that's nice about this is that more and more what we're doing is something called telepresence. So we bring the vehicle down and we stream live not only to the ship but over to the satellites, and then satellites send it to shore. And so one program we did in 2005, we actually ran the cruise from the University of Washington 5,000 miles away on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and we had 24/7 presence, and you can stream it all over the world. And so for cruises like the summer when we're out there, anybody can watch the cruise evolve over time when we're on the seafloor, watch our discoveries, watch when things go awry. And really it's a very interactive process. So it's a great way to get more engagement from the public and let people see what we're doing since it's taxpayers' money. This was kind of gives you a good overview of the mobilization aspects of this. So the ship is completely empty when all over the world we'll have students going from New Zealand this winter. This is the Thompson at the UW dock. We take digital art. We take all kinds of students out with us, and this was a time lapse that the digital art students did, loading Jason, the ROV Jason from Woods Hole at the UW dock, and it gives you a sense of one, how empty the ship is. They had sort of a good sense of humor. You'll see that in a few minutes. But the ship is completely empty, so we bring every piece of gear that we need. It used to be that we didn't bring too many computers, and now the main lab is completely full of computers. Let's get in the vehicle. Usually it takes about 3 days to mobilize the robotic vehicles, depending on the ship and depending on where you are. It's always an exciting time. For us, since it's right at our deck, I always think of it as car camping, so we carry things on. This is one of the sunny days in Seattle, so this is the lab. On our cruises now, there's almost no deck space. It's completely full with equipment and computers everywhere. So this is a freshwater area that we're steaming through Seattle. There's a Space Needle. And then there's a series of locks that go out into Puget Sound, which is saltwater. So that's about 3 days compressed here. There you go. So it was yeah. That's one of the nice things about students is they see things differently than I do sometimes. From Seattle, it's about, the main volcano I'll talk about, Axial, it's about 1.5 days steam out to the site. So I want to zoom in a little bit. I mentioned underwater volcanoes, and we can look at some of these on land in old ancient crust, places like Cyprus or Oman, where there's 91 million year old oceanic crust exposed. But I'm still always amazed by the different landforms. This used to be an old lava lake that has a roof that had collapsed. This is when the magma comes out, or the lava comes out on the sea floor, it's about 1200 degrees C. Where we work at 2200 meters, the seawater there is about 3 or 4 degrees Celsius, and so the lava immediately quenches and turns to glass. And it's easy to see often the new lava flows because they're very glassy, and this is an older flow. But what I want to talk about now is give you a little introduction to what I love studying, not only volcanoes, but the hot springs. And so at a mid-ocean ridge, there's a hot rock down beneath the seafloor, and so seawater, because the ocean crust is cracked, cold seawater migrates down into the seafloor to depths of a kilometer. Probably the deepest is about 6 or 7 kilometers, depending on where you are, maybe a little deeper than that. And as it does that, remember, this is a very, very hot rock, so that's 1200 degrees. By the time you're up in here, it's probably about 700 degrees C. So the cold seawater migrates and it starts heating up, and as it heats up, it becomes acidic and it leaches the metals out of the rocks it's going through. And there's always volcanic gases coming off of the magma chamber, so things like carbon dioxide, there's hydrogen sulfide, methane, different gases, hydrogen, and that magmatic gases get entrained in this, what was once seawater, but is now, we call it hydrothermal fluid because it's so chemically different from seawater. And so by the time it's down in this zone, what was seawater is now very enriched in magmatic gases, and it's full of dissolved metals, and it's very, very hot. And so it comes flying out of the seafloor. It looks like really like a fire hose. And these fluids can get up to over 400 degrees Celsius. And because they have metals dissolved in them, as soon as they hit the cold seawater, we call them black smokers because these are fine-grained. If you've looked at fool's gold, pyrite, chalcopyrite, things like that, these are very fine-grained sulfides. And I'll talk more about the animals that live here, but because these fluids have dissolved gases in them, and there's no sunlight down here, the microorganisms, these single-celled organisms, have developed novel metabolisms to use things like hydrogen sulfide, methane, carbon dioxide for their cell building. Then they can also use toxic metals, and I'll show you some examples of that. And they form the base of the food chain, and then there's these other animals that have symbionts inside of them. These are tube worms, and there's a very interesting symbiotic relationship between the microbes that live in these environments. They were first discovered in about late 70s, 79, and it was one of the most fundamental discoveries of our planet, of our time, because prior to that, everyone assumed that most of the life on the planet was driven by sunlight, and with this discovery, there's a huge amount of life that's very, very diverse that's driven by underwater volcanoes. And I'll show you some more examples of that.
Visualize.
So this is a video that's about 3 minutes long, and we took 2 students out. They'd never seen hydrothermal vents before, and one of the projects that they did is, one was a freshman, who's put together this video, and I really like it because it's in their own voices, and it describes how they think about hot springs, and it's pretty visually appealing. So it's about 3 minutes long.
Visualize the most extreme environment you can imagine. What do you see? Mountains, deserts, glaciers? Maybe places like these come to mind. Places with harsh climates, scarce food, and no water. But what about a place like this? Located 300 miles off the coast of Oregon, an active underwater volcano called Axial Seamount protrudes from the seafloor, looming thousands of feet above the barren seascape. This dark setting has never seen the light of day, as sunshine barely penetrates 600 feet into the ocean. At these depths, there are conditions rarely observed on planet Earth. The pressure due to the overlying ocean is 150 times what humans experience on land. That much force is equivalent to having a Boeing 747 jet on your chest. Temperatures here are cold and constant. Throughout the year, day or night, the water lies just above freezing at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Suddenly, sharply jutting up from the seafloor are columns of rock towering over 5 stories high. These pillars can be enclosed in so much bizarre life that the rock itself isn't even visible. And the strangest part about this ecosystem? Fluids reaching temperatures of 660 degrees Fahrenheit are continuously flowing out of these chimneys. That's over 3 times the boiling point of water at sea level. Indeed, some of the microbes thriving near the vents have the highest temperature tolerances of any organisms known on Earth. These structures are known as hydrothermal vents and are found in the caldera of axial volcano. Hundreds of similar vents are found in every ocean around the world and are created when seawater seeps miles down into the ocean floor and becomes superheated by volcanic magma, forcing it back upward far from where it entered. When the metal-enriched fluids meet near freezing seawater, they lose hold of these minerals and produce deposits that eventually build up to form these great stone monoliths. A mile beneath the waves, this thriving ecosystem can't depend on the sun for photosynthesis, as almost all other life does. Instead, the organisms living in total darkness need another source of energy, a source that comes from below instead of above. Bacteria harness the energy from the toxic chemicals seeping from deep within the underwater volcanoes through a process called chemosynthesis. The success of this entire ecosystem is reliant on these bacteria, as they are the base of the food chain. This environment is an obvious competitor for the most severe that the world has to offer, and yet its various processes are poorly understood at best. Novel instrumentation is currently being deployed into the ocean to provide high-quality data in hopes to better understand this underwater oasis of life.
I think it gives a since they've been discovered last 35 years, over 300 and a lot more than that now have been discovered of these. Basically every place we've looked in detail, we've found hydrothermal vents, and the high latitudes are a great place for discovery right now. They're tough to work in, but we do know there's a lot of vent systems at the high latitudes as well. So this is just some of the properties of black smoker chimneys. They're found on all the spreading centers that we've looked at. They're fueled by underwater volcanoes. They can occur at all different kinds of pressures. Boiling is very common. Temperatures in many of these systems are over 350 up to 400 degrees. When you talk about the organisms, part of the reason they're there is because of the magmatic gases. So there's a very strong link between the volcanoes and life with carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen sulfide. They're very acidic. And there's a lot of interest right now, the follow-on slide will talk about it, is to try and understand what the upper temperature limit of life on the planet is. And these systems are definitely one of those places where we can explore that. So one of the amazing things about, and I'll show you a video in a little bit about these underwater volcanoes, is not in all places and not on all eruptions, but in some areas, and I'll show you some video of axial, when there's a volcanic eruption, there's billions and billions of microbes that are streaming from the seafloor right after these eruptions, and it can last for several months. These organisms, they're hard to grow. We know from looking at branching out from the Human Genome Project, there's new ways to look at the genetic information of these organisms. We know that there's incredible diversity. And these organisms live not only in the rocks, so these are basically living rocks, but they live beneath the seafloor to some temperature, to some depth, and we don't know what that upper temperature limit of life is right now. Some of the organisms, some of these vents, they may be sources for larger organisms that are found way up into the water column. So they might be kind of like an island source for very important organisms shallower in the water column. And more people are looking at things like pharmaceutical from the seas. And so one of the interesting things is they have industrial applications, bioremediation, but some of these organisms, when you bring them up and stress them out, they produce different antibodies. And so the pharmaceutical companies, some of them are interested in looking at things like producing new antibiotics as our bodies get more resistance to things like penicillin or tetracycline. So there's a lot of, not only is it just a really cool place to work, but there's also some societal value in looking at these hot spring systems. And NASA is certainly interested in them because as they explore for other life on other planets, things like Europa, places like Europa, one of the things that you'd want to know is what are the most extreme conditions on our own planet that life can thrive. So this is a close-up of some of these animals. This is one of the vent systems off our coast. These are palm worms. These are limpets, so about maybe a little bit smaller than your thumbnail, something like that. This is a bacteria-covered scale worm, and if you look at his beak right here, pretty soon it's going to take the head off of that worm right there. And so this is one of the reasons that we want long-term video, because yeah, there he goes. Is because this is usually in the dark, and so a lot of the behavior of animals and how they change over time without having a continual presence, it's hard to know what they're doing. And actually, some of the worms help precipitate out metal sulfides on the structures. In other places, this is courtesy of Tim Shank at Woods Hole. In other places, so in the Pacific, we see lots of tube worms. In the Atlantic, these chimneys, some of them are so covered, this is all metal sulfide, so covered in shrimp that you can't even see the sulfide chimneys through there. And there's some interesting questions about whether these, how animals find hydrothermal vents, whether they have chemical sensors. These shrimp, some of them have a way to, it's an enzyme or chemical that would normally be used for looking at light. And so early on, there was a lot of interest about whether if you take out the right camera with the right filters, these chimneys put out black body radiation, and so some of these animals may be seeing light, but it's not in our visible spectrum. And that may be one of the ways that they find these vent systems. And this is one of my great, I love this guy. We call him a Dumbo octopus. So this is at 2,200 meters. The seawater is pretty cold down here, again about 3 degrees Celsius. And this is an extinct sulfide chimney. They move pretty slow because it is cold. There's not a lot of food down there for them. They don't seem to be light sensitive in the sense that we've actually seen them rear up at the submarine, which is sort of comical. One of the cool things about this one in particular is that the eyes, you'll see as she, it has pretty big eyes, and they're morphologically related to human eyes, which I always find kind of interesting. They're relatively, we don't see too many of these white ones. Usually we'll see these red ones, and in axial, the ones that we've seen, they are sensitive, so they'll morph into whatever the color is of the background of the rocks. They'll morph into that color. So just like squid, they're able to change their coloration if they want to camouflage themselves. And you can find this one online if you do octopus ballet. But it's a very, I don't know, find it very gentle and peaceful looking creature down there. So thinking about origins of life here, there's a lot of astrobiological interest in this right now, and I think most people would think that life has probably originated in the vents, whether they're black smoker ones or one I'll show you in a minute. But they do have amazing microbes that live. So if you think of a conduit, this chimney is about 14 meters tall here, and it has that look to it because it's completely covered in tube worms. But if you think about, there's these conduits that are 350 degrees C fluid, and that's a close-up of that boundary. And in some cases, depending on the chimneys, it could be several meters across. It could be a couple inches. You go from 350 degrees to, these fluids don't have any oxygen at all, CO2-rich fluids, to seawater that has a lot of oxygen. So there's really amazing chemical and temperature gradients that are driving the life that we see in these environments. And one of the things that we did, we cut this chimney off in 1998, I guess. And we went back in 99 and we sampled, this is all new growth, I'll show you a picture of that in a sec, and passed it on to a microbiologist. And one of the test tubes didn't have any microbes, one did, and they had dissolved iron in it. And these microbes actually precipitated a magnetite, an iron oxide type phase. But that's interesting enough that they precipitate metal sulfides, or magnetite. But they also, at that time, in 2003, was the highest temperature organism on the planet. So 121 degrees Celsius, lives on oxygen-free environment. Since then, the Japanese have cultured one at 122, and we've found evidence we might be able to push it up to about 150 degrees C. So there's all these incredible discoveries still to be made, not only in the life that is there, but also just exploring our planet. And this was one example that we discovered in 2000. So I've talked a lot about black smoker chimneys, these metal sulfide chimneys, but we were out on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, far away from where you would think you'd find black smokers. And instead what we found is a 60-meter tall chimney. It's all made out of limestone. And it's a very, very different, it's probably been active for at least 150,000 years. It's quite a large complex. And one of the amazing things is they have, find them in black smokers too, but we call them underwater waterfalls. So they're kind of upside down waterfalls. So this is a very thin layer of 90 degrees Celsius fluid that's leaking out of the chimney walls, and it forms these flanges, these pools, very thin pools here, and then it wafts over the edge and keeps precipitating out these carbonate material. Sorry. How's your ears? There we go. We'll try that again. Sorry about that, guys. So these are, maybe I won't play the video. The interesting thing about Lost City is that unlike black smokers that have a lot of carbon dioxide associated with them, there's zero, and that's what the organisms use. Lost City has zero carbon dioxide. It's all methane and hydrogen. And so these organisms, they live in very, very different kinds of fluids. Their liquid drano has a pH of about 12, and these fluids are pH of 11. So these organisms have figured out how to live on 90 degrees C, liquid drano-like fluids with a lot of methane and hydrogen. And we know it's been active for, it should be 150,000 years, and we're guessing it's over 200,000 years. And so NASA is now adopting this. It's not associated with volcanoes at all. It's a very different kind of rock. And so NASA is now using this as a model to look at other kinds of planets where you don't necessarily need volcanism. So it's really changing how we think about where life might be. Sorry. So these volcanoes and vents are very, very dynamic, and this is just the one example of that chimney again that we cut off in 1998 and went back 3 days later, and this rock, so this is metal sulfide rock, grew 2 meters in 3 days. We've seen them grow 10 meters often in a year. They're very dynamic. We've seen a 50-meter tall chimney that we'd been to many, many times, went back next year and it had fallen over, probably an earthquake, maybe earthquake-driven. And the animals change over time too, so this is a chimney that we used to visit quite often in 2000. This is the temperature of the venting fluids, and you can see that over time, not only the vent temperatures, but the chemistry changes and the animals change with that. But the problem with these, I mean, the good thing is we got to go there multiple times, but we would go to these places from year to year, and they would change so rapidly that sometimes we weren't even sure we were in the same place. And so a lot of the processes on our planet, things like big storms, landslides, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, they really fundamentally change the heat, the chemical output of our planet, but we're not there often when we need to be there to see and make the right measurements over time. And so this idea John Delaney thought of, oh boy, about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago now, as more telecommunication systems were being utilized, was to install a fiber optic cable from this is Pacific City, Oregon, out to the largest volcano on the Juan de Fuca Ridge, as well as along the subduction zone, and then there's a whole coastal array that I won't talk about. There's some methane seeps. A lot of interesting, this is a very, very productive area of the planet in terms of fisheries, lots of biological activity going on. This has a very high signal-to-noise ratio for ocean acidification. So we had about 300 scientists that put in proposals to study this area with and then we picked key sites where we could basically do the most science for the most people over time. So the National Science Foundation funded this. So it's supposed to have a lifetime of about 25 years of operation. There's 900 kilometers of fiber optic cable on the seafloor right now. It provides a lot of power and a lot of bandwidth, so about 8 kilowatts and 10 gigabit per second. We have moorings, I'll show you a picture, that have instruments on them, on wire crawlers and a winch profiler that go up and down through the water column. Right now we have about 140 instruments all connected to the fiber, and that's important because it means that we have two-way communication from the University of Washington. It goes from the shore station to Portland and then to the UW and onto the internet so anybody can see these. So we can do things like change look angles, change sampling rates in response to things like volcanic eruptions. And nothing is proprietary, so anybody in the world can have access to these data in real time. And there's a lot of room for expansion. So huge opportunities for the public, students to be engaged in the kinds of science that we're doing out here. This is kind of big substations on the seafloor. So this is hooked up to the main backbone cable. We use a lot of technology, some of the technology that comes out of the oil patch. We don't want to bring these things, they're several tons, they're about 12 feet across, 12 feet long, 6 feet tall, and you don't want to bring things up and down through the water column very often. So we use underwater cabled connectors, so they're wet mate connectors, so we can come in with a robotic vehicle, plug the extension cables in, unplug them, and leave this system on the seafloor. These are built to industry standards. They've been out there since 2012, and they've been operating very well. And basically what they do is they provide a lot of bandwidth and communication on the seafloor. To reach the main key experimental sites, the Applied Physics Lab at the UW have developed these smaller junction boxes. They have the same type of wet mate connectors. There's about 8 ports, so we can put 8 instruments down on the seafloor, each one of these junction boxes. There's about 18 of these now installed on the seafloor. They've been working for since 2014 continuously. We've never had any trouble. And each one is kind of designed for specific instruments. So as people add on infrastructure onto the cable, we interact with the scientists and develop the ports that they need, the kind of communication, the power that they need for their individual instruments. But one of the great things about this, we haven't used anywhere near the power or the communication capabilities of the system yet. So early on, it was planned to be to optimize expansion capabilities. And NSF has now funded 3 proposals to add on. We have a commercial proposal funded and an international proposal. So a lot of interest of people coming to add on to this facility. We use robotic vehicles, we again mentioned, to install all of the infrastructure on the seafloor, and we've just had our first 2 years of maintenance. So every summer we go out, things get biofouled, instruments need turns, so in about 38 days we recover a lot of instrumentation and put it back down on the seafloor. So this is, I'll zoom into axial volcano now. And we picked it because it's the largest volcano off the coast. There's a lot of people in this room that have worked on it. It erupted because we'd like to understand how volcanoes erupt, so you got to put infrastructure there. It erupted in 1998, 2011, and again in 2015. And it was the 2015 one was particularly exciting because we had the full infrastructure operating at that time, which meant that lots of scientists from around the world, around the country, could see that eruption ongoing. I'll zoom in here at the base of the volcano for a second and show you one of these profiler moorings. So this is I'll do the tectonics. So the idea is that the spreading center is running right through the center of this. This is a caldera, or large collapse zone. This is an eruption that occurred in 2011. This is work by Mbari, Dave Clegg, and Dave Caress, and this is the outline of the eruption. For scale, this is the top of the seamount's about 1,500 meters water depth. It's about 3 kilometers across, and down where we have one of these primary nodes with one of the cabled moorings, it's about 2,700 meters water depth, and from about here to there, it's about 25 kilometers, just to give you a sense of scale. So in 2011, we were doing a lot of work out there to find out where we should lay the cables, where we should put the instruments. And in April, there was an eruption, and we were out there during the summer. This was discovered on a NOAA cruise. Bill Chadwick was out there earlier than us, and then we went out there. And one of the amazing things is that, it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in my life, is when we went out and we drove along this rift system here. Bill had seen these also, was in these big, where there used to be where there once were large lava lakes that have now crystallized and collapsed in on themselves. We call these things snowblowers, and so these are large pits. They can be several meters across, several meters deep. This is a little bit above ambient seawater coming out of the seafloor. It's a little bit warm. It's full of carbon dioxide. And what happens prior, during, after an eruption is there's a lot of warm water that is circulating through the oceanic crust because you have hot rock melt intruded into the seafloor. It cools down. There's a ton of circulation, a lot of nutrients because the volcanoes have a lot of carbon dioxide in them. And so what we see are these amazing microbial blooms from the microbes that are living down in the subsurface beneath the rocks. During an eruption, there's a ton of CO2, a lot of gases coming out, and so these microbes undergo phenomenal blooms. And depending on, near these collapse zones, we see organisms that they don't like oxygen, they live at high temperatures, and they take carbon dioxide and they produce methane. So when we look at these fluids, we see high methane concentrations. And then as you get away from where the more nutrient-rich fluids are coming out of the vents, we see a lot of iron oxidizing bacteria. And I want to show you this video because it's pretty amazing. So this was, it starts out, we did a experiment for the kids that we had watching from shore and also on the boat, but we took styrofoam, probably a lot of you guys have seen this, but we took styrofoam cups and heads and put it on the outside of the vehicle. And then you'll see that it kind of gets squished as it goes from the atmospheric conditions down to 1,500 meters. So. And then we're going to come down, we'll land on the lava, or drive across the new lava flow and into some of these snowblowers. We don't see them on all the eruptions. The Venari and people at Woods Hole and UW have seen them on the East Pacific Rise. So this is one of these old collapsed lakes. This is the new lava flow. This is all biologically produced. There's microorganisms in here, but there's stuff called floc. It's kind of a mucus, snotty material that's produced by the microbes. And then these are all the iron oxidizers as you get. These are glassy, brand new lava flows, but they're so covered in microbial mats that they have that kind of old look to them. And so these go for several months after an eruption, and they're probably endemic to a lot of the eruptions that go on, but again, unless you're there fairly close after an eruption is occurring, you probably don't see them. So we saw us as well as NOAA, Bill Chadwick's group. We saw a lot of these snowblowers, and I think they're just amazing to see how life blooms right after an eruption. The other thing that we haven't seen at Axial, but we've seen in other places, it's sort of like an analogy to an ash cloud and a continental volcano, but there's these things called megaplumes, and as you inject 1,200 degrees C melt in the water-saturated crust, you might imagine that it's can be pretty dynamic. And so in some places what we've seen is these megaplumes where there's a large plume of water that's warm water ejected 1,000 meters above the seafloor. They're always associated with these eruptions. And they can be 20 to 70 kilometers across. They reach a zone of neutral buoyancy. They entrain novel microbes that were once beneath the seafloor, so there's a lot of interest in the microbiology of these systems. They entrain glass. They have sulfides in them. And they can last for quite a while, in some places depending on what the circulation system is above the volcano is. But unless you're there right after an eruption or very close after, you don't see these things. They put a lot of heat and chemicals and microbes into the overlying water column, and very, very rarely have we seen these things, again, because we don't have a 24/7 there. And so one of the things that we did with Axial, we put for many reasons, but one of them is we put a mooring down at the base there, and this is what one of these looks like. It has a winch profiler. Here we're taking down the ROV. This is a 12-foot across, 7-ton platform. And you'll see there's looks like the kind of thing you use on a garden hose to wind it up. And it goes from 200 meters water depth to just beneath the ocean surface 9 times a day. It's made over 9,000. They turned into islands. The fish really like these places because they're protected. We've done over 8,000 profiles. And the hope is that we can see one of these mega plumes. And because we get real-time data coming into shore, people can be looking at the data. There's all sorts of things that go on in the water column, thin layers with lots of animals, microorganisms in them. And so we can start responding to these events because we have the right infrastructure and the right time, 24/7 there. And I tell my students, and I think I absolutely believe it is, we have 140 sensors out there. There's everything from seismometers to DNA samplers to CO2 pH sensors out there. And because these instruments are measuring at the highest rates they can measure, so up to 240,000 measurements in a second on some of these. And they're going 24 hours a day. And so because we've never had those kind of measurements, I think even if you're looking at oxygen, which we know pretty well in the water column, I think any student that looks on these in detail is going to make discoveries. And that was always important to me. I always thought when I was younger that all the important discoveries had already been made. And I think there's huge opportunities here. So this is the top of the volcano. This is what's installed right now. This is one of those big yellow primary nodes. And then we have extension cables. The longest one is about 5 kilometers across. This is a hydrothermal field called ASHES. There's another one over here called the International District. And these are the seismometers, or these are the kinds of instruments that we have. And so I'll zoom into this for a second. But everything from underwater mass spectrometers to digital cameras. We have instruments that go right down into the hydrothermal vents to measure. If they're boiling, they can put out fresh water, even though it's in a saltwater system. So a lot of different kinds of instruments to look at how the volcano's behaving, if there's melt migration beneath the sea floor, and the impact of underwater eruptions on all these animals over time. So I'll zoom into ASHES for just a second here. So we have a HD camera that's streaming live. It streams every 3 hours now, so you can log on to in your home. And it goes for about 14 minutes, and then twice a month it goes for 24 hours a day. And this is the quality of the video that's streaming. These are these little limpets, again about the size of your thumbnail. That's about 3 centimeters across. It's a little scale worm. This is the real video that's coming in. So it's over 300 miles offshore. It's about 400 some kilometers offshore. 1,500 meters down, and so you can watch this whenever you want to. Then once a month it streams for 3 days continuously. There's a little scale worm there. So it's pretty amazing, high resolution. We can actually, the cable can take 10 gigabits per second, so eventually we'll like to go up to 4K stereo out there. And one of the things that we did is, this is called mushroom, and so this is a chimney that we've been looking at. If you look at, this is days over here. So each day we take a screen grab, and this is a little chimney that's forming. On the white, you can see filamentous bacteria here. And so for the first time, it's about 1 centimeter growth per day. People, we can have this in the classroom. Kids can adopt a piece of a chimney and then watch over a year or longer and see how the chimneys grow over time, how the animals change. And so I think it's a very engaging way for students to learn a lot about all different kinds of things that go on in our ocean. This is just one example. So one of the things that we did is we installed a bunch of seismometers. These volcanoes are very, very active. And so at each of these yellow dots, we have a couple different kinds of seismometers out there, and we wanted to see how melt is intruded into the seafloor during an eruption, how it migrates up and out of the caldera over time. And so in April, there was a couple-day meeting at the University of Washington. Bill Chadwick had seen unprecedented uplift of the volcano. There's pressure sensors, and I'll show you that in just a second. And so the idea is as you pump more and more melt into the subsurface, imagine pumping melt into this room. Eventually the roof of the room is going to be uplifted and it starts tilting back outward. And so Bill had was paying attention to the pressure sensors out there, and he saw unprecedented uplift occurring. And so there was this meeting to try, and it appeared that something was going to happen over some time scale, that there would be an eruption. And so there's about 90 scientists at the UW from all over the country, all over the world, talking about when this volcano might erupt and how we might respond to it. And 2 days later, because again all these data are coming alive, William Wilcock at the UW had been looking at the number of earthquakes per day, and you see from when we first had the system start going, the Navy was testing during this time period, but you can see that there's a definite increase. So this is number of earthquakes per day, and on April 24th, it went over 8,000 earthquakes over a 24-hour period. So these are small earthquakes. We would never know this was going on land because these are 1 magnitude or less, most of them, and so you'd never know what was happening out there. But that signal there is clear that something was going on. And I remember when William sent out an email and said, "Oh, I think something's happening out there." My first indication was we called all the engineers and said, "Are all the instruments still working?" Because we were afraid they'd be covered with a lava flow. But we lucked out, and it avoided where we were working. So as a side note, we can also do, because we have the seismic array, I'll talk about the eruption in just a sec, a little bit more, but because we have a seismic array out there, we can also track whales. And one of the really cool things is that we can track vocalization, and we can track individual whales. And one of the students that just finished her PhD at the UW has been using these acoustic arrays to track whales, how they migrate through the oceans. And it turns out over the last 10 years, their communications have been changing. So not only is the frequency kind of the noise that they're making, but they have a very regular pulse, how they talk, so to speak. And that has changed over the last 10 years, so their communication is changing over time. And another side note, the whales, some of them like to hang out above hydrothermal vent systems. And again, it was because of the seismic network that people were able to figure that out. We think it's because, not because there's warm water there, but because there's more biological activity. There's increased nutrients associated with these hydrothermal plumes, and the whales have figured it out. They also can hear in the frequency of these eruptions, so they definitely know when an eruption is going on. So the seafloor fell. So the seafloor, there was over 8,000 earthquakes, indicating that there was melt migrating within the volcano. And at the same time, Bill was looking at the bottom pressure tilt instruments, and so this is one that we installed that's cabled. And over the same time period, this is depth. The seafloor, over that about same 24-hour period, the seafloor fell about a little over 2 meters over time. And so what that meant was that there was melt being ejected, probably in a dike, definitely in a dike, out of the volcano in an ensuing eruption. The other thing that followed was, this is a temperature measurement inside one of Bill's pressure sensors. Was when we went out there and Bill saw the same thing, was very, very cloudy water. And the temperature throughout the caldera near the seafloor had also increased. So the lava flow not only perturbed the seafloor morphology itself, but it also heated up a lot of water. And so there's a lot of interest in how much heat these volcanic eruptions put out onto the seafloor. So the other thing that we have is hydrophones out there. And this is what you could hear if you were, well, you can hear it from shore. So this is sped up about 5 times. But they're not earthquake events. These are implosive events, which are interpreted to be underwater explosions. And so we could be on land as the volcano was erupting and hear these underwater explosions. And there were thousands of these things, tens and tens of thousands of these acoustic signals. So the ocean, it's actually quite a noisy environment. And people were able to use these, I'm going to escape this here for just a sec. They were able to use these acoustic signals because we have more than one kind of sensor out there, more than one in place. And this is a video that shows all these blues are the earthquakes, and then these red are these waterborne acoustic signals where we think where we now know there was an underwater eruption. And so what was cool was scientists from Lamont and UW and Oregon, lots of places, were looking at these signals, and we were out on the ship. We didn't know where the eruption was at the time, and the interpretation was that these were explosive events of some type. And so we went out there when we were doing the work on the Cable Observatory, and a student of mine using the Thompson, it's a Hall-mounted bathymetry sonar system, we drove up and down over this area here and found a 127-meter thick lava flow. It's quite a thick flow. And again, at that flow, when we drove over the top, so we landed the sub within about 10 meters of the eruption. And this is, right there, you can see that's glassy flow. These are one of the, they're kind of rare, but this is where one of these pillow basalts has broke open, breached, and you can see the lava that had come out of it. And then this is for acres and acres on top of this very, very thick flow. These are smaller snow blowers, and so these are more iron oxidizers, and then these small snow blowers. And so it seems to be endemic to a lot of these eruptions, particularly if they're thick and there's a lot of warm fluid, very nutrient rich, that has this biological material. And here you can see warm water coming out of the sea floor. We went back out there last year, and there was still a few places where there was elevated temperatures of maybe 14, 17 degrees Celsius, but most of the fluids it was no longer venting over time. So the future. So we have this amazing facility out there now, and NSF and other countries are now adding on to it. But where do we go from here? What we'd really like to have, and Dave Clegg, I think, would agree, is underwater autonomous vehicles. We have a network out there. We can have an acoustic mesh network out there. We could put moorings out there. So if there's a large eruption, a megaplume event, we can have a 3D array with underwater vehicles, autonomous vehicles that can actually park in a garage, plug themselves into the cable, recharge their batteries, and download data, and then they go out and they remap not only the seafloor morphology, they map the water column, and they map the animals there. And you can do repeat mapping at a daily basis over and over and over again, measure how much the seafloor is changing over time, and measuring how the animals change over time. And it sounds a little bit far-fetched, but it's not. These vehicles, the oil industry is going to more and more unmanned platforms beneath the surface. And so they're putting a lot of energy into autonomous vehicles with these docking capabilities. And I think the first time axial erupts and there's an autonomous vehicle taking imagery of that eruption is going to be pretty spectacular. It'll probably pay for itself, I think. So I'm really passionate about students and education, and I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the science that we can do with the system, but with the increase in technology and the way computers are going now, imagine in 10 years how we'll bring these kinds of very complex data sets with different visualization tools into the classroom to people in the middle of continents all over the world. Almost everybody has a cell phone now, and so even kids that may not have schools, a lot of times they have cell phones. And how do we bring this amazing place so that everybody can share it and get excited about the planet we live on? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deb.
Sure, thank you. Oh, the Dumbo? You should go online. We got really close to it, but it was about like this big around. They're not gigantic. They're not as big as the Pacific ones that we'd see. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, so I didn't speak about it. When the project first started, there was a group of scientists from Canada and the US that got together. And so there's the Juan de Fuca plate, which is a small tectonic plate, which is why we chose it. The northern part, Canada has a system there too that's also cabled. And what's cool about that is there's a place called Endeavour, and it's kind of a different end member than axial seamount. So axial seamount erupts a lot, and that's why it's so big. This place, Endeavour, in the first time we went there was about 1980. We've never seen a seafloor eruption there. And there the chimneys, chimneys on axial are quite small, or maybe 4 meters or so, probably because there's so many eruptions that you change the plumbing system and the hydrothermal vents get buried by lava flows. But on Endeavour, where there hasn't been eruption for as long as we've been there, there's been diking events, the chimneys get up to 50 meters across and 50 meters high. And so it's a very different kind of system there. And, so the next place that we're thinking is has more of there's a lot of interest in research, but also societal value is to install the whole Pacific Northwest is waiting for the 9 magnitude earthquake. If you do a look around the Pacific Rim, we're the quiet one right now, and the last one was in 1700. And depending on the numbers, we're either a little overdue or plus or minus 100 years, or more. So what there's a lot of interest right now is to expand the network along the subduction zone, like Japan has done, to get an early warning detection system for tsunamis. One of the things that they learned in Japan is what you really need is tsunami detectors near shore. It's not the far away ones. And also, typically what happens along the Cascadia, or typically we have a few numbers, right, is that from Northern California, the whole subduction zone zips clear up to northern Vancouver Island. And so that time, if it starts unzipping in the southern part, we might have a few minutes warning in Seattle before that happens. So we're actively engaged. We got a little startup package to install something like that. And we're interested in having kind of a hybrid system where we'll have lots of different, pH, CO2 moorings, as well as the more applied work as a facility to understand how subduction zone earthquakes happen. And one of the cool things that they found in 2 different places now, one was Japan, and off to Costa Rica off of Japan, there was seafloor movement before the major earthquake occurred. And they found it with a pressure sensor that wasn't cabled. And so there's hints that the hydrology of the ocean crust may change, and the seafloor may move before these big eruptions. And so if we can have the right instrumentation over a long enough period, we might be able to, I don't know, use a forecast, but learn about how these things happen. So I would love to have lots of volcanoes. And New Zealand. New Zealand would be a great place to put an observatory. Mm-hmm.
Are you looking at setting up perhaps a citizen science program that people can get involved and help identify perhaps some of the new life forms and things?
That's a great question. So the citizen science aspect of this, we thought about it in a lot of different ways. One is, adopting where we do have repeat imagery, people can look at the imagery and look at the animals. We've also thought about a friend of mine set up one for. It was in the Puget Sound area where, so we have broadband hydrophones in coastal environments where there's lots of mammal activity. It's incredible. They're chattering like crazy. And so what they did is they did a tutorial where you can go online and hear what different mammals, what their voices sound like. And so people using that hydrophone data in Puget Sound, they each pick whatever segments that they want, right? And then they identify what those animals are that are calling. So I think there's a ton of opportunities for people to look at data, and we're trying to develop more visualization tools so that it's pretty complex to look at some of these data over time, and they can be quite large data sets. So we would love to have. That's why we built it, is to have people use it. So yeah, great question. Mm-hmm.
So we were attending the conference for this happening URL from Advantage. Can you provide those URLs to Gary?
Absolutely. And if you go oceanobservatories.org, that's where there's a data portal. And you can also get it through a site called Interactive Oceans. So a lot of the imagery that I showed, we have an educational site at the UW called Interactive Oceans, or you can search on Visions 16, Visions 15. And a lot of the video that I showed, every dive we take the best hits of all the video. And we also got a biological catalog where the students made, where they took all the best hits of all the animals that they've seen and have a little bit about them. So if you want to look at more Dumbo octopus, there's lots of video and squids and stuff to look at. So thanks, guys. This has been really enjoyable.
Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting, and I'm particularly interested in the micro in the within the chimney.
Mm-hmm.
There are some chimneys per se. So I'm wondering have people done work to test the distribution of the microbes interrelated to the
Exactly. So the question was, in these chimneys where there's very steep gradients over centimeters to meters, is to look at the gradients of the organisms that live in the chimneys. So the chimneys, I didn't show you a picture, but when you cut them open, they look like pumice almost. They're very porous, or a sponge. And the outside temperatures are oxygenated seawater, 2 degrees C. The inside, 300 degrees or more. And when you, I didn't talk about it, but even at 4,000 meters, 2,200 meters, the lunar tides impact flow in the chimneys. And so you can see this tidal pulsing. And so all the time there's seawater that gets pushed into the chimney walls. It's oxygenated and cooler. There's different kinds of microbes that really like that. And then it's going like this all the time, right? And so in, what year was it? 2003. We used a drill that Mbari had, and then Dan Fenari adopted for ROV Jason, and we drilled inside of these chimney walls. We also we took an underwater chainsaw and cut 1997 6-foot tall, 2-meter tall pieces of chimney, and we drilled into those and cut them open. And then students looked at the organisms on the outside and the inside, and you see very, very different kinds of organisms because of as you might expect, the ones on the inside are usually 90 degrees C or higher temperature microbes. They don't like oxygen. They like carbon dioxide. And the ones on the outside like more oxygenated conditions. And the highest cell concentrations are right in that mixing zone where it's a super high energy environment. So there's a lot of, that hasn't been done very often, so there's still a lot of questions about. I always ask the microbiologists, when we've seen a chimney wall, it was like this thick, right? And so right there's 305 degree fluid, and right here there's 2 degrees C, and right next to that 305 place, we were able to look at DNA and look at archaea there. I don't know how it stays there. It seems like I'd get cremated or something. So anyway, lots of fun. That's because I'm a geologist. So. Anyway. Thank you.